Metaphor ReFantazio is either the most brilliant title for a video game ever, or the most pretentious. I happen to take the position of the former. I felt right away that the theme of the game was congruent with a similar theory I've had for years about storytelling, one that I know I'm not alone in having, which is that the real world as we know it is actually fake, and fantasy is where the truth about ourselves and our institutions truly lies. Everything about people, be it celebrities or authority figures, even the image of how we view ourselves in the mirror, is based in bullshit. Our politics are designed specifically to subvert the truth and to divide us. That's why we call any discourse on the subject matter just part of the spectrum. It's a spectrum because the only permissive conversations on the topic exist in an echo chamber devoid of any truth or facts, as the mere penetration of truth would collapse the system like throwing a dart to a balloon. As Noam Chomsky is quoted as saying, the smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but to allow very lively debate within that spectrum. A problem cannot be solved if it cannot be diagnosed, which is why art needs to be political, as long as it's in the right way and for the right reasons. At least in the world of art, typically the debates we can have are a bit more free and decentralized because creative license goes a long way in giving an alibi for the people and places that are normally off limits to us. Any policy change that is sanctioned by real official authority is almost certainly a tepid ruse to incite infighting so that no one stops to notice the real source of the problems, or indeed to identify the problems themselves. All religions are based on lies that are either by the very fact of their claims proven false in their face, or so unfalsifiable that there need to be no reason to consume time or energy in giving prayer or fealty to the recycled myths.
Sanctism Shadow, the fog of deception has finally cleared. There is no God. Think hard on your salvation, and whether you'll find it in prayer.
It's very bold for a piece of entertainment to address these topics directly, albeit in a nuanced fashion with philosophical parallels over pedantic references to political trends. Metaphor touches on the topics of old in a setting that could just as well be modern because that's how little progress civilization has made on these matters since antiquity. But putting the metaphors within a fantasy setting gives us an alibi to speak truth to power without alienating the so-called modern audience through didactic guilt-tripping methods and the assault by vacuous talking points exhaustedly regurgitated and debunked in many cases by the talking heads on news networks and the social media opportunists. Somehow, someway, getting constructive criticism from the real world draws default anger and skepticism from viewers of all backgrounds, thanks to confirmation bias and, indeed, prejudices that come in many varieties. But if you say succinctly in a story that politicians are only ever self-serving rather than subserving, and that religious dogma is designed to indoctrinate rather than to inspire, the message is more comforting, more believable, and even more right on the nose than reality itself can provide in its own form of warped theater. Truth is stranger than fiction, but that doesn't mean that the truth can be found in fiction. In some ways, reality may only be exclusive in fantasy. The roles are actually in reverse
The same
here.
is true of all your future subjects. No man or woman is completely honest. Fiction has its role to play in supporting people. Like with you in that book you hold so dear, yes? Reality starts to give chase. It closes in on us eventually. So when that time comes, well, if that time comes, we'll run from it for as long as we can.
This is the bet that the writers took when making Metaphor ReFantazio, a curious title that I think means to recontextualize fantasy as something more than just make-believe. It's the story of our lives. It could be tough to discern the exact intended meaning behind anything in a game that has this extensive of localization, but the localization is thorough in its messaging, tying these themes of existential angst together to educate us on how corrupt real-world authority actually is. and how to make strides against it. If only it was as easy as calling on an archetype. If only people were as passionate in the real world about issues that they would rip their own hearts out in sworn oath to protect and defend their beliefs. Archetypes are used in storytelling to be reminiscent of familiar faces so that the subject material can be easily digested and understood by the audience. The lines of morality clearly distinguished by heroes and villains, but compelling characters, those that leave behind an imprint on us, are often ambiguous. The central villain is seen to be Luis, but I'm not so sure that that's the case. Luis is certainly the most charismatic and most compelling antagonist among the many candidates for the throne, but in reality the case Luis makes is very similar to the protagonist's own case, if not even more convincing at times. Perhaps the real enemy of progress is just people themselves, those that are too fearful and anxious to want change. These exact themes have been explored in depth in previous Atlas titles. In almost every Persona game, spoiler if you haven't played 3 through 5, the main theme is always some variation on the collective unconscious, giving birth to a cosmic entity that seeks to enslave humanity based on the very paradoxical, primordial desires of the people to be deprived of free will because making complex decisions is too tough. Or more accurately, we are afraid of commitment and responsibilities. Why does nobody want change? The singer Lynn asks in songs like Life Will Change and Wake Up, Get Out There, which are powerful ballads inspiring us to consider the implications of the storytelling on our own lives. Metaphor paints a picture of a society disjointed by discrimination, stagnant due to a lack of inspiration as much as a lack of available resources. Some hold faith in the purely invisible piety, and some hold faith in the omniscient yet vacant ruling class. The Sanctus Church offers empty prayers and largely impotent faith-healing methods to its people. Much like the real-world healthcare system, evidence would suggest it's just enough to help some people get by long enough so that they might get sick again and come back for the same so-called treatment. The experiments done on people meant to achieve human progress end up producing living failures. It's a half-truth, a half-measure. The same is true with the political atmosphere, just thick enough to show signs of life, but making it hard to breathe. Luis kills a king that has long since abdicated his responsibilities. An invalid, perhaps almost welcoming death as an escape from the burden of leadership. Kind of paralleling to the real world, what? Luis very quickly establishes himself as an anti-establishment and anti-religious agent of chaos, the double whammy against authority in this world. Countering the hypocrisy of theocracy, Luis proposes and delivers on promises of real-world action, something that the figureheads Forden and Hythlodius are incapable or unwilling to provide. Indeed, Luis has selfish reasons, an appetite for revenge to satiate his own regrets in life. It's not the first display of a villain that took things too far in seeking compensation for personal loss. Luis seeks power because that was the thing he lacked the most in his most desperate time. Hythlodius had power, but lacked the nerve, the will to make fantasy a reality. As they say, weak men make for weak times. But weak men do not necessitate weak-minded children. The prince was shunned from public adoration and outcry, left to his own devices to dream of a better world, a more interesting world, like our narrator, Moore. This manifests in the protagonist, the one that has eyes of two colors, because he is said to see the world both as it is and how it could be. They are all dreamers with very different schedules for when to wake up. Old men grow cynical, while young men are often too zealous to achieve their goals in full. It takes someone with a balanced life experience to perfect the act of the renegade, as Orson Welles put it.
Oh, in about every way, because the real renegade has to be a little short on that final 10% of ambition. He has to be more interested in what he's doing than what he is. And in your early 20s,
You need to be short of that final 10% of ambition. One must be more interested in what he is doing than what he is. The first rule of life is that you cannot please everyone. Trying to do so is a setup for failure. Consider the king's speech in the final chapter of Metaphor's closing ceremony. Our new king is honest about not knowing the precise way forward, because perhaps there is no absolute virtue. But he will try anyway. Like with YouTube or game creation, we cannot simply work for algorithms or to appeal to our demographics. The real art in telling a story or doing anything related to craft is finding something that you as the creator enjoy doing the most, and then doing your best to articulate that passion to others that may find themselves in your same orbit. Unfortunately, our little YouTube is tailored toward fishing in the biggest view counts the fastest, based on minute-to-minute trend cycles. This instant gratification is not what art should be based on, nor politics or any other measurement of cultural well-being. Real change does take time and cooperation from many people in a society. Collectively, we can be heroes in solidarity. If we fight for change alone, predicated on I and me, we end up as misguided, overly ambitious fools, and we end up alone without support. Religion and politics are cults like any other, be it a cult of superstition or of personality. What we need is to extend our faith and support in real, tangible virtues like one another. Fantasy is one such virtue that, for the purpose of semantics, might be fake, but also real, because it was created with imagination in mind, with real people at the center. People are always looking for the metaphorical dragon to slay, because they would rather focus on the imaginary problems than solve the real ones. So we try to use fantasy to remind each other that our problems aren't going to go away on their own, nor will a single-minded charlatan come along to save us. Groupthink requires group effort, but true unity is not achieved until everyone has a fair opportunity to share the successes that the group endeavors to achieve. We cannot exclude a single tribe over a single grievance or disagreement. No matter what religion, political affiliation, or race we belong to, if we do not value people and independence over the ideological monolith, we will all remain in chains. We must break the chain, the cycle, the corruption in our systems by keeping fantasy alive always and in our hearts.
You've got the power to change the world. And the one who gave it to you was, well, yourself.